and get a lot of votes for her to do that. So what is the bottom line of all of this? I think that we tend to, when we think of changing the world, you look at the African American freedom struggle, I just thought it was wonderful to start with the slave trade, and understand, as Vincent Harding put it, there's this river of resistance that has gone on for hundreds of years. And it takes place in small little communities as well as in big places. It is a movement that allows a Martin Luther King to have his impact. One way of thinking of Martin Luther King would be to simply say, gosh, it was so remarkable. Here's this wonderful orator who could come and give a speech in Washington in 1963 in August, and a year later we get a Civil Rights Act. Wow. Wonderful orator. Or he can get involved in a march from Selma to Montgomery. A few months later, a Voting Rights Act. Wow, what a leader. Forgetting, of course, that each of these movements had its own history that often is not accurately told. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the most remarkable things in terms of understanding the movement is the role of children. Yes. People who are not yet adults, they can't vote. Certainly not then when you got 21-year-old vote. How much of the movement was reliant. If King had failed in Birmingham, we would not be celebrating his birthday then. And when he left jail, there's a lot of emphasis now on the letter from Birmingham jail. He's in jail, he writes this wonderful letter, and we kind of make that letter into something that changes history. But that letter was almost completely ignored at the time it was written. Very few people were aware of it. When King left jail, he left as a failure. That letter did not change any of the equation in Birmingham. The movement was going to fail. He went almost as a desperation move to try to say, if I go to jail, maybe that's going to change our ability to bargain with the white leaders in Birmingham. When he came out, nothing had really changed. They were just as obstinate as they were before. What changed came later when he made a decision reluctantly, and a very risky decision, when people on his staff, including Dorothy Cotton, came to him and said, Dr. King, the young kids are eager to get involved in this struggle. And he knew that was an enormous risk. Imagine if one of those kids had been killed trying to explain to their parents, you encourage these kids to come and protest. And he makes this crucial decision. Yes, we're desperate. If they don't come, we're going to lose this struggle, and these kids are going to grow up under this segregationist system that is crushing them. And yes, it's a risk, but it's a risk worth taking. And we know the result in the beginning of May, when hundreds and eventually thousands of kids left school, left their classes, walked out, and in fact, around one of the largest high schools, they had a fence. The kids left and pushed down the fence to get out because the principal had locked the gates to prevent them from getting out. And they streamed into not just one school, but all the schools. That the kids came to 16th Street Baptist Church and flooded the downtown area, going to get arrested, and knowing that that's going to be the result. And that's what turned the tide in Birmingham. Young kids, some of them as young as 8 and 9 years old, who went to jail in Birmingham. And so now we can see that that victory of gaining some kind of a settlement in Birmingham leads to John F. Kennedy introducing civil rights legislation, leads to the March on Washington. But if King had failed, would he have been invited to give the concluding speech at the March on Washington? Almost certainly not. And when we look at the Selma to Montgomery March, remembering that the Boynton family had launched that voting rights movement in the 1940s. And I had the pleasure of Amelia Boynton when the 50-year anniversary of the march, and President Obama came to Selma, and rather than 600 people going across that bridge, it was 70,000 people going across that bridge, with President Obama pushing the wheelchair of the 103-year-old Amelia Boynton, and understanding the significance of her role. So what I'm suggesting, and all of you are educators in some sense of the word, is that we need to do a different kind of education. That if you are not familiar with the stories that I've just told you, then you're missing out on an opportunity to put your students at the center of the struggle, to get them to understand that it wasn't Martin Luther King that freed them. It was kids their own age that contributed. And that this kind of education for liberation, we have in the King Institute, one of the things that I set up as part of our public outreach is what I call the liberation curriculum. And any of you who want to go to our website and look at it, there's free lesson plans that you can download for your students. And we're just, touching we're just getting to the point where we are beginning to tell the many, many stories that they need to know. One of the things that we're going to do this fall is to have a conference at Stanford that brings together the Gandhian struggle and using King as the symbol for the African American struggle, and look at these connections among these two important freedom struggles. And that kind of work, I think, when I look at the title of your group, that's what you have the expertise to do. You have the expertise to tell this story of these connections and the role of ordinary people in liberating themselves. So with that, I will, one of the things I'd like to do is to respond to questions rather than give long lectures. So thank you very much.